Here's what I know is true. Most weight loss plans are one size fits all. So frustrating. They don't take into account each person's individual needs, which could mean dietary restrictions, medical issues, or other personal needs. That's why you're going to love Noom. It's built for your psychology and your biology, meeting you where you are. Noom's personalized programs feel more sustainable than any other, more restrictive weight loss programs. And also, it doesn't shame you when you choose to treat yourself, and that's important. I like this company because it's got a psychology and biology-based approach and a super easy app to use with lots of great features, including daily lessons, coaching, and flexibility. I think it's your time to start. Stay focused on what's important to you with Noom's psychology and biology-based approach. Sign up for your trial today at Noom.com. Based on 3.5-year study of actively engaged Noom users with minimum BMI of 25. Individual results may vary. Visit Noom.com for more information. Okay, you want to look luxurious but not spend a lot of money? I got you covered. With Quince, you're going to treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price. Something everyone needs in their closet, in my opinion. Quince's iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, guess what? They start at $50. Or if you really want to up your luxe factor, check out their Italian leather bags, washable silk skirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for, all Quince items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. It's because they partner directly with top factories and cut the costs of the middleman, passing the savings on to you. And also, they work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel. You guys need to go get yourself the bodysuits. That's my new obsession. Look great with jeans or a skirt. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/KateCasey for 365-day returns, plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/KateCasey to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/KateCasey.
The amazing Kate Casey.
Welcome back for another episode of Reality Life with Kate Casey, and welcome back for this most special Saturday series episode. This week, I interviewed retired FBI Special Agent Richard Marquis about Pan Am Flight 103, which exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland on December 21st, 1988, after a bomb was detonated. All 259 people on board were killed, and 11 individuals on the ground also died. He led the FBI's Pan Am Flight 103 investigation. At the end of the interview, he said to me, I have the perfect person that you need to talk to, someone that I worked directly with in that investigation. And she is my guest today. Kathryn Turman served as the assistant director over the FBI Victim Services Division from 2002 to 2020. Former FBI Director Robert Mueller brought her to the FBI several months after the September 11th attacks with the mission to establish a robust professional victim services program. In 2005, she established a terrorism and mass-casualty victim services response team that's become an international model. Prior to joining the FBI, she served in the Department of Justice as director of the Missing and Exploited Children's Program, chief of the Victim Witness Assistance Unit in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, and principal deputy director and director of the Office for Victims of Crime. She served on national task forces and advisory committees, including the Federal Task Force on Child Abuse and Neglect. She received the Edmund J. Randolph Award. This is the highest honor provided with the Department of Justice. In 2000 for her work with the Pan Am 103 families. She's also the recipient of the Attorney General's Award for Distinguished Service, 2 National Crime Victim Services Awards, 2 National Intelligence Medals, and is one of the few federal employees to receive presidential rank awards for both merit and distinguished service. She retired from federal service in June of 2020, and she is arguably the Bureau's most consistently called upon contributor. She presided over the FBI's victim-centered responses to every major case since 9/11, including the Boston Marathon bombings, multiple mass casualty shootings, international kidnappings and murders, and scores of federal crimes. Again, one of the most accomplished guests I've ever had, and most certainly the most humble. Here is my interview with Kathryn Turman. Kathryn Turman, what an honor and a privilege to talk to you. Of course, we have a mutual connection in Richard Marquis, and He told me so much about you. And I am so elated to get this chance to talk to you about your incredible career and all that you have done for not just victims, but what you've done for our country. So congratulations on an incredible career. And thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Honor to be here. And I'm a huge fan of Dick. We've just, our careers have sort of intertwined a lot over the last 25, 30 years. So
yeah. Well, you grew up in Texas, and I know that you went to UT and you studied sociology. And after graduation, you spoke to your roommate and you were talking about what you had planned to do with your life. And it was important for you to do something of substance. But there was also something that happened in your area, an explosion. And that also set a tone for kind of how you wanted to move into your career. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I grew up in Tyler, Texas, and just right outside of town was a small community called New London. And in 1937, I believe, there was a school that served all of the kids, like from first grade through 11th or 12th grade. And it served a small community, farmers, oil field workers, and others. And one day in March, that school blew up. There was a natural gas explosion. The school had been illegally tapping into waste gas coming off the oil and gas fields. And they think that a janitor or someone accidentally, hit a hammer and sparked, and the whole school blew up, killing over 300 kids, teachers, staff. Entire families lost all their children. It just devastated that community, devastated the surrounding area. A lot of people from Tyler and other small towns around tried to work on rescuing kids from the rubble, their bodies primarily. I had the opportunity when I was in college to meet Walter Cronkite, who was an alumni of the University of Texas. And we were at a meeting, a Board of Regents meeting, and he found out I was from Tyler and immediately went to that explosion, to that event, and talked about how it impacted him as a young radio reporter. It was one of the first major events he covered. And he talked about how he would never forget getting there that night and seeing all the cars and trucks with their headlights pointing toward the rubble while rescue workers, volunteers, and parents scrabbled through the rubble to try to find the bodies of their children. So it was strange, though, because no one ever talked about it.
Yeah.
When it happened, it went around, the news went around the world. I mean, the Queen, the King of England, all of these people responded. It was, with sympathy. But then within that community, the community sort of died for a long time. There was not much left there. And there was just silence around it until the 50th anniversary. So that was when I started paying kind of attention to it, and it helped me to understand a little bit better some of the things I'd heard over the years about that experience. And the people, like, it broke windows in Tyler 10 miles away.
Wow.
That experience.
So when you leave UT and you study sociology, what's the first job that you get?
Well, my roommate studied special ed. She was going to be a special ed teacher, and we packed her Volvo and my little car, Mustang, and drove to Dallas and tried to find jobs in our fields. And of course, we couldn't for a while. So we had different jobs. I remember working for a construction supply company for a summer and then teaching at a little private school for a year. Ironically, Kay ended up with a job delivering airline tickets for a travel agency around downtown Dallas. So, and eventually we ended up in our jobs. I did some retail work, high-end retail work for a while, and started volunteering. I volunteered at Dallas Children's Medical Center. I volunteered at Shriners Hospital for Crippled Children, and some other things. So when I had an opportunity much later to go to Washington, D.C., and work on the Hill, that was the opportunity. It was sort of funny because I didn't expect it to be that way. I expected to go and work for the senator on the Hill and get involved. And then he was killed in a plane crash. And I moved from there over to the Justice Department and started working with child victim issues. So,
well, first of all, you work for John Hines, and I'm from Pennsylvania. So
yeah, I thought so, with the Hershey School.
I can remember very much my mother talking about how horrible that moment in time was.
Yeah.
And I thought about you working for him and what that must have been like for you. Walk me through that.
Well, it was a terrible day. The senator was an amazing person. He had a good heart, brilliant guy, a moderate Republican, which I'm not sure they exist anymore, but he worked across the aisle. He was one of the first senators, Republican or Democrat, to really get into environmental issues and hosted some environmental stuff. But great guy, very interesting, lots of fun, hard worker, expected a lot from his staff. So it was a great honor and a lot of fun to work with him in that environment. The day that he was killed, it was his Easter break. The Senate was in recess, and he was had taken a week of vacation and then was doing some events in the state. And he was flying from one place to the other. And that morning, he was in Williamsport boarding a charter plane to take him to Philadelphia, where he would meet with the editorial board of the Inquirer and then host some hearings on, I think, Medicare fraud. So when he was getting on the charter plane, he called and we were chatting about some things. And he was in a great mood and signed off, got on the plane. And I went to get lunch, expecting him to call when he got to Philadelphia. And I came back from lunch and I didn't hear anything. Our chief of staff, I shared an office with him. He had gotten a call from someone about a potential aviation accident in Pennsylvania. I got a call from a reporter from the Philadelphia area who said that she was at the scene of a plane crash and had picked up papers with Senator Hines's address on it. So after a crazy half an hour, we were able to confirm that it was his plane that had gone down in a collision with a helicopter over Lower Merion Township. So devastating experience for all of us, particularly for his family, his wife, his kids, his mother. But for the staff in an office like that, it's like the senator, the member of Congress is the nucleus, and we're all the cell around. And, when that person dies suddenly in office, everything just sort of stops. So I learned a lot from that experience about my own grief, how people react to sudden violent loss like that, what to do to support the family and to support the other staff. I mean, our chief of staff and I and some others were helping people find jobs because we had 60 days from the time the senator died to basically clear out the office and make room for the person that was going to be appointed to his staff, or to his position. But it was something that I didn't realize was going to prepare me for the second phase of my career that I was going to have. And ironically, while I was working for the senator, the bombing of Pan Am 103 occurred. I was flying from Washington to Dallas for Christmas and heard about it when I got into Dallas and heard Peter Jennings talk about this plane that had gone down over Scotland. And when I came back to the office a little while later, we learned that there were people from Pennsylvania that the senator knew. There was a guy that the office was familiar with. His daughter was on the plane and was killed. So that was my first sort of exposure, of course, to Pan Am 103. And then some of the families were on the Hill the next year or two, advocating for better terrorism laws and aviation security and all of the things that were, the result of failures from the bombing of Pan Am 103. So I had no idea that case was going to follow me the rest of my career, and still to this day.
What are some of the moments in the aftermath of a tragedy like that at that point in time, the government sort of blew off as not important in terms of working with families and helping organize and get them the information they need?
Well, I think even just from the senator's death, one of the things I realized that day was it hit the news very quickly before anybody had an opportunity to notify his mother, who was on the West Coast. We worked very hard to try to get his sons, who were, one was in Georgetown and the other two were in Boston, to get the news to them before they heard it on the news. So, for his mother, it was devastating to hear it on the radio, basically, and to call the office and say, what's happened to my son? So the other thing I remember that afternoon that happened was once the media found out about it, they just swarmed the Hines home in Georgetown to the point where they couldn't open the door. People couldn't come in and out because there were reporters just surrounding the house. And I remember calling the Capitol Police and asking if they could, get somebody there to try to help with crowd control and protect the family. And they were like, it's not my job, not our job. So we ended up having to call the Metropolitan Police. The FBI by that time had called others because anytime you have someone die in a suspicious plane crash, there were just a lot of people to deal with, reporters swarming our office out in the hall. It just took time to sort through all of that and to learn personally and from the experience of the family how much it helps to provide information, accurate information, but also privacy and space for people to absorb that information and to be together when they're in shock and trying to accept and hear more about what happened to a loved one. So there were a lot of things I learned, even just to the extent of getting a call and having to call his dentist and get somebody to get dental records to the medical examiner. That's something I'd never dealt with before, but, figured it out and did it. And everybody we were all just making it up as we went along and having to help plan the family plan a funeral service and then a large memorial service at Washington National Cathedral. So, like I said, there were a lot of things just learned from what things kind of helped and what didn't, what seemed to be adding sort of extra pain to an already raw wound. And then also just about my own grief and wondering what he went through, what he experienced in that time between, there had been a situation where they weren't sure whether the front landing gear was down in his plane and a helicopter had volunteered to fly underneath. And it just was a disaster. And both aircraft collided and fell to the ground, killing everybody on board, 4 pilots and the senator. So, there were a lot of things about that I think we all struggled with. Sort of wondering what he knew, how long he knew it, what did he suffer. And I learned much later when I started working with families of homicide victims and terrorism victims. And I met a psychiatrist who's an expert. He's now retired on violent death and bereavement. That it's really normal for people to have to wonder when they're not there for a death and it happens suddenly. People wonder what happened. They wonder what the loved one went through. And in the absence of information, they will imagine different scenarios. So as hard as it is sometimes to know the truth, to know the facts, it's probably better for most people to know and be able to come to terms with that than to always wonder what happened. And I saw that play out in my work with victims and the people that I worked with, and even from families or family members of victims who would write or call, particularly when I was at the FBI after 9/11, begging us to tell them whatever we knew about their particular loved one, where they were in a particular building, what they knew when they were on the plane, who they were sitting next to, all of those things. So we would spend a huge amount of time researching that information to try to provide that privately to the family or family member.
One of the examples that I remember you gave was that in Lockerbie, there were a set of twins. And that it was really important for the parents to hear that the twins, inseparable in life, were also together on the plane.
Yeah, and they did not hear that until almost 12 years after the bombing, when a police officer from Lockerbie testified about finding a certain piece of evidence. And I was there. It was early in the trial. And when he finished testifying, he left the stand and came into we had a family safe haven and then an office. And he came in and asked me, he said, would you happen to know if the parents of these boys are here? Because I've always wanted to talk to them, and they happened to be there. We arranged for them to meet. And he was able to tell them that he had also found their sons' bodies, and they had been together. And it was 12 years later to hear that information, bittersweet. And I saw that play out again later with a lady who testified. She was the boarding agent and was the last person to see them alive, and could testify about a passenger that missed the plane, but was able later to tell families what it was like in that boarding area on the December 21st, the evening. Here are all these Syracuse students, 35 of them, all of these military families, other families, business people returning home for the holidays, the atmosphere there in the boarding gate. And so it was very bittersweet for families to hear, not to hear just bad details, but to actually hear about the last happy, normal sort of moments of their loved ones before they died.
Yeah. Well, and you worked with Robert Mueller on 9/11. And something that I noticed 9/11 is that in the few days afterward, that despite this massive amount of grief and confusion about what was going to happen in our world, there was this beautiful sense of interconnectedness that we all kind of felt, and love and support. And I wonder if you feel that in the darkness of all these moments of grief, there is this like pure love that you feel and see between strangers.
I think that happens a great deal. And it doesn't always last because,
Right.
eventually finger pointing starts and, reality hits and people react very differently. But I think in the aftermath of great tragedy, I've seen remarkable human kindness and that connectivity you feel. And I saw that and heard about it more, particularly in Lockerbie. Here's this little small town of about 3,000 people, market town in the south of Scotland, very, nice little place. And then all of a sudden, this jumbo jet explodes over their town and their fields and farms, and they're catapulted from this quiet little town into the world's media attention. And not just for then, but for like 10 years afterwards, people were coming all the time, media, other people writing about it. And they welcomed families in. And there were relationships between some of the Pan Am 103 families and the people of Lockerbie that persist to this day.
Wow.
They visit, they go back and forth. Father Keegan performed a wedding for one of the victim's sisters. And one man was found on the farm of a couple outside of Lockerbie. And when they found him, they called it in to the police, and the police couldn't get there for a while. So they said, leave him where he is. And this couple took turns sitting with him, his body, because they didn't want him to be alone.
Wow.
And they didn't know his name, but they called him our boy. And it wasn't until a long time later that they learned his name. And then 4 years later that his family came to visit. And his daughter said, one of his daughters, that she never knew what unconditional love was until she saw the love that these total strangers had for their father after he died, So, and they have visited back and forth. They became family to each other. So there were lots of examples like that. And, after 9/11, the flights that got diverted, that couldn't land that day, some of them went to Canada. I think it was Newfoundland, maybe. And the Canadians just took people into their homes. And so, there are those extraordinary moments, which I wish would be more and more ordinary, where people just, in the wake of tragedy, reach out and do whatever is necessary to help people.
My new goal this year is hydration. My days get so busy, it's actually the one thing that I always forget to do. And I love Liquid IV. It is powered by hydroscience, and it helps you break the mold. They've got great flavors, like my personal favorite, the pina colada. Think about how much you are working out. Are you refueling? How much did you actually drink to rehydrate? Liquid IV is leading the way in flavor innovation. They've got a ton of great flavors, including the sugar-free flavors like raspberry lemonade, white peach, and rainbow sherbet. You can break the mold and own your own ritual. Just one stick plus 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, 8 essential vitamins and nutrients, and always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code KateCasey at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today by using promo code KateCasey at liquidiv.com. This episode is sponsored by Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing so your money is the chance to grow for you, your kids, and your retirement. You don't need to be rich. Acorns lets you invest with the spare money you've got right now. You can start with $5 or even just your spare change. And you don't need to be an expert. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that fits you and your money goals. Head to acorns.com/KKC or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. Paid non-client endorsement compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors LLC and SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/KKC. How were the experiences working with victims of 9/11 and also experiences working with parents of missing and abducted children profound to you?
So I'll start with my first job after I left Senator Hines' office was director of the Missing Exploited Children's Program in the Justice Department. And it was mainly a program policy funding office. We funded the National Center for Missing Exploited Children, but we also, you can't do a job like that, a small program and office, and not get involved and not get to know a lot of families of missing children. And we would hold conferences for them to come together and share what they had learned. And we developed training for law enforcement and others on how to work with families of missing children. And what I learned most is that it's a loss that never really ends, particularly if you don't ever know what happened to the child. And we dealt with families whose kids had been abducted and they never found out what happened to them. We dealt with families whose kids had been abducted and their bodies were found. And we had rarely, sometimes you'd have a happy story where a child would be recovered alive from a stranger abduction. We dealt with a lot of family abduction cases, but what I learned most, I think, from those families of missing children is if law enforcement does nothing else, they investigate, they follow up the leads, don't make families come to you over and over again begging for information. If you are an investigator working with a case of a missing child, contact that family, reach out to them, particularly if it goes on for years. Don't make them always call and have to figure out who has the case. So just the idea of periodically reaching out to the family of a missing child and saying, just checking in, nothing new to report, but I want you to know we're still actively working this case. Is any lead? We follow it up. But just so they're not out there in the dark begging for information about their kids and wondering if anything is happening because they're not hearing anything. So I think that's one of the most valuable things I learned about long-term cases, and particularly when you have turnover over the years where you have a different investigator, or if it's an FBI case, a different agent. I dealt with a hostage case that went on and on for a long time, and the case agents changed. And the sister of the victim called me and she said, "Why is it that I have to keep explaining why this matters to every new person?" And I said, "You shouldn't, and you don't have to." I said, "It's just, let me see what I can do. We'll get some better communication going," because that's the worst feeling, I think, to just wonder whether anybody else cares or whether they're really looking into it. And often they are. The investigations are going on, but the officers, the agents, sometimes just don't know what they can tell families. So I think that's where advocates like me, people who work in victim services, can really help, because they can be that conduit from the investigator to the family or to the survivor. I met Bob Mueller actually when I was running the Missing Children's Program, and he was the Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division. And in that position, one of the things he did was oversee the U.S. investigation into the bombing of Pan Am 103. So my first contacts with him were around missing children and Pan Am 103. And then I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia to be chief of the Victim Witness Assistance Unit when Eric Holder was the U.S. Attorney. About 6 months later, Bob Mueller quits his job in a law firm, high-end Washington law firm, and comes to the U.S. Attorney's Office as a line homicide prosecutor. The U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia is both the local and the federal prosecutor. They do both courts, both codes of law. So we sort of ran into each other again there and worked on a number of cases together, including one of a child that had been murdered. And Bob handled that case. And I was amazed, not amazed, but really respected him for the time and the effort he took to work that case. He had to go back and reinvestigate things because the police had made some big mistakes. But he ended up getting a second-degree conviction on that case. So like I said, we worked together then. And then he left to be the U.S. attorney in the Northern District of California. I ended up going over to the Office for Victims of Crime when Janet Reno was the Attorney General and running that office. And that was where I was when the Pan Am 103 trial kicked off. And it was Janet Reno who tasked me to do that. So Bob Mueller was out in San Francisco. I knew his involvement in the case. He knew what I was going to be doing with the trial, the Scott's trial. So we communicated a lot, and I made sure that he had access to some of the information about the trial that we were getting. And then after the change in the administration, he left the U.S. Attorney's Office and ended up as the acting Deputy Attorney General under John Ashcroft at the time. He was an acting. And I was still at OVC, and we linked up because I set up some meetings for him with Pan Am 103 families after the verdict. And then it was just 6 months later, I guess, after that, he went to the FBI as the director of the FBI. He was there about a week when 9/11 happened.
Wow.
So that night of 9/11, I was over at FBI in their, what they call the Strategic Intelligence and Operations Center in SIOC, and I saw Bob there. I was in a room trying to get stuff organized for the families and the survivors, which was very complicated. When I was in OVC, we had dealt with the Khobar Towers bombing victims. It was a bombing of an apartment building in Saudi Arabia where U.S. Air Force personnel were living. We also dealt with USS Cole and the embassy bombings. And one of the reasons the Office for Victims of Crime got so involved in it was because the FBI didn't have a really viable victim assistance program. So Ms. Reno would get frustrated with that and task us at OVC to work with those families. So when we were used to, I was learning a lot about terrorism, learning a lot about Al-Qaeda, actually, because they were behind so many things, including the attack on U.S. servicemen in Somalia back in 93. And that case had been linked into the embassy bombing case when we held briefings for families on that. So that summer of 2001, I had worked with a private entity, a nonprofit, to set up a call center, emergency call center. So in the event of a terrorist attack, a major one in the United States, we would have an 800 number that we could direct people searching for family members, looking for information to them, or to get people looking for help. So we had them on a retainer, basically, for about 2 months before 9/11 happened. And when it happened, I was in the office. I was getting calls from a colleague of mine at the National Transportation Safety Board who oversaw the assistance to families of transportation disasters. And she was calling me saying, there's something going on. I'm in our operations center. It seems like there may be a couple of hijacked planes. We don't know yet. And then she called me back to say a plane hit the World Trade Center. And she said, I'll call you back. And over the course of about an hour and a half, we were going back and forth, and we were on the phone with each other and watching television when the second plane went into the second tower. So she became very involved because it was also an aviation disaster. Our good friend who ran the Office of Mortuary, Casualty, and Family Policy at the Defense Department, the three of us were close friends. Janet Reno used to call us the disaster queens. She said whenever she saw the three of us together, she got really worried.
Yeah.
But we had been working on plans. How does the U.S. government better structure support and information services to families of terrorism and major aviation disasters and even natural disasters? Because whatever the cause, there should be at least some standards for how we assist people in those cases. So Sharon and Meg and I were on the phone together quite a bit all through 9/11. We learned a lot from each other. The big challenge for the U.S. government with 9/11 was that there were 3 impact sites. New York, which is New York, and New Yorkers who run the city of New York wanted to do things their way, and they had their And then you had the Pentagon, which was a military facility, but you also had civilians there. You had 4 planes with passengers and crew, which there are different laws that apply to assistance for victims of aviation disaster victims. And then you had Flight 93 in Pennsylvania, which was a little bit different. So you had these 3 impact sites, multiple populations of victims, sometimes with different resources and benefits attached to them, and very complex. I think if it had been one impact site, it would have been a lot easier, but it was always a challenge from the beginning just to get the victims list together. The FBI was responsible for that. Starting the day after 9/11, we convened a working group of people from different federal agencies and the Red Cross. And most of us had worked with each other and started talking about how do we coordinate this? How do we coordinate all of these different services for all of these different families and survivors? And it was a little messy at first, but we eventually started working things out. We developed a matrix, actually, that had all the different agencies and organizations there, what their funding was, what their limitations were, what their requirements were, what they could do, where they could do it. And we started updating that. The call center, that first day, the first 24 hours, they got like 17,000 calls from people desperately looking for their loved ones. So we began, the contractor who had the call center started compiling lists of family members and people who were searching for others, and we provided it to the different sites. The FBI had to develop the official victim list. That's the requirement under the law for terrorism. So the Pentagon was no problem. Flight 93 was no problem. The flights that hit the World Trade Centers were no problem. But trying to get information out of the city of New York was a little bit challenging at times. It was just, people weren't used to working together on some of these things. So the FBI had to rebuild a list. And by the time we finished, I was at the FBI at the time, we had 13,000 family members and surviving victims who'd been injured in that list. So it took a while. One of the things we did that was pretty creative was the FBI, the Office for Victims of Crime, managed the Federal Crime Victims Fund, which is a fund that consists of money paid by federal defendants, federal offenders who are either convicted of or plead guilty to fines. Some are large corporations that pay a lot of money. And all that money goes into what they call the Federal Crime Victims Fund. And the money's distributed to the states and to individual organizations and agencies to fund victim services. At one point, it was billions of dollars a year. And when you have that much money on the ground, it didn't take long for the Office of Management and Budget and members of Congress and others to figure out how to take some of that money, even though it's supposed to be in reserve. And they found ways to use the Crime Victims Fund money for other things. So I don't think the Crime Victims Fund is in very good shape anymore. And it's a shame because crime victims programs at the state, local, federal, tribal level are shutting down or cutting back staff and have been for a number of years because there's just not enough money coming into the fund. But I digress. But that was very helpful. And we gave money to the FBI through a vehicle we had with them to set up an emergency travel center in a hotel nearby in Washington, D.C. And it was staffed with people from OVC and some U.S. Attorney's Office and FBI personnel who came over and for about 3 weeks talked to family members from around the country and around the world who needed to come to the United States, to the sites where their loved ones died or were presumed to have died, so that they could deal with apartments and cars and the medical examiner's office and all the different things that have to happen. So we set up a travel center and paid, I think it was about $400,000 in travel for different family members to come from wherever they were to New York or Washington or Pennsylvania. And then once the Red Cross had their travel money built up after 9/11 from donations, then we closed down the FBI Travel Center and the Red Cross took that over. So just coordination to be able to do that, so that because the Red Cross could pay for people to go to memorial services and the Federal Crime Victims Fund couldn't be used for that. We could use it to transport a victim's remains back to their home area, but we couldn't pay for travel to memorials, which the Red Cross could do, and some of the airlines did that for their passenger victims. So 9/11 was, the victim assistance was sort of slow to unfold as we all got coordinated. I was still at the Office for Victims of Crime, and I ran into Bob Mueller a number of times when I was over at the FBI, and there were a few times when he said, what should we be doing for the families? And we would talk about it, and it became clear from our conversations, I think he caught on to the fact that the FBI didn't have a very robust program at that time. They didn't really have much of anything. They had some people doing it as collateral duty in some offices. So in December, he called me where I was in the Justice Department and said, the FBI, you're right, there really is no viable victim assistance program here. And he said, I want to create a program, an office. Will you come over and run it? And I said, yes, if I can come at my same salary level and get a parking space. And he said, deal, you're easy. Yeah. I got the phone. And the next thing you know, went home to Texas for the holidays, came back, and he had engineered my transfer over the holidays, even contacting the Attorney General at home to get him to sign off on it. So I went from OVC over to the FBI and started with a very small office and had to build it up over time, and then hire victim specialists in all the FBI field offices.
And weren't there only 6 employees at the beginning, and then it rose to maybe 300?
Yeah, well, in the office at Washington, at the headquarters of the FBI, it was a small office. I inherited some people from the asset forfeiture unit. Nice people, but not enough of them. We were able to get funding for 122 victim specialists for the FBI through the Federal Crime Victims Fund. So we started hiring those people. At the same time, we were still dealing with 9/11, with other terrorist attacks. We had anthrax, we had the Bali bombing, we had other bombings and terrorist attacks all over the world. And then the administration started the incursion into Iraq and then Afghanistan. So we had all of these fronts, all of these things going on, and trying to build a program while literally trying to manage all of these things. And for a long time, it was me, an agent that we brought in, and one other person that was doing a lot of the direct contact with families and arranging for the transport of a victim's remains from Iraq back to the Doverport mortuary in Delaware, the Armed Forces mortuary, where they would process the remains, and then we would work with families to get the victims shipped home or to the family. So we were doing a lot of that ourselves, plus dealing with 9/11 and trying to build a program. So the first several years, I really don't remember much of my life other than...
I'm sure you didn't.
I had a lot of people were that way, but I had a sign in my office that said, I'm so busy, I don't know whether I lost a horse or found a rope. And it was sort of indicative, but the agents, all the people that were brought to Washington to work on the 9/11 investigation, there were, I don't know how many, dozens and dozens of them who were living in hotels and working out of a really abysmal basement office for 2 or 3 years. So we all tried to help and support each other and work together. It was a very compelling case. Everyone felt it. And I don't think I've ever seen a group of people so dedicated just to getting to the bottom of it and making sure that it didn't happen again. People who left their families, like I said, for 2 years at a time and worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week for a long time. So everybody sort of pitched in. But like I said, we were trying to deal with 9/11 and deal with all this other stuff. So we started meeting with, there were so many 9/11 families, but we started meeting with representatives of the different families groups. There were a number of them. And I set up some meetings for them with Bob Mueller and other FBI executives so they could start to answer questions and talk to them. And people were angry. They were upset. They were frustrated. And the government sometimes can be a safe target. I mean, it's not personal. It's just, people get angry. It's hard to lose somebody, and particularly when they think that it's preventable. And almost anything's preventable if you go back and look at it with hindsight. And some things are clearly preventable. But Bob Mueller stood in front of those family groups and took it all, took their anger and their frustration and just said, we're going to do what we can do. We'll get you the answers. And, we're going to keep going. So they would beat up on him a while, and then they would feel badly after he left and say, please tell him that we appreciate him talking to us. He's the only executive head of an agency that's agreed to meet with us, not just once, but multiple times. So he just saw it as his duty and his motivation. He was very involved with the Pan Am 103 case early on, as I mentioned, and he went through that warehouse in Lockerbie where all the personal effects were kept, and would talk about looking at college student stuff, tennis shoes, and jackets and things that you would find with young people, and how much that affected him. So I think that really carried through with 9/11 and the other cases that we dealt with at the FBI. We also started having mass shootings, shootings and others, and we ended up developing a response team. It started with just victim specialists and people from our office at headquarters. And over the years, particularly after the Boston Marathon bombing, we expanded that team to about 84 people and opened it up to agents and evidence recovery specialists and analysts, because when you go out and respond to families and survivors of a mass violence act, you need people to work on collecting victim information. You need people to handle the emergency victim assistance money, and you need folks who can liaise between victims and families, whether it's an injured victim in a hospital or a family who's lost a loved one, to do the interview, and then also to recover and associate and return, sometimes cleaning personal effects to give back to people. So those teams, it was called the Victim Services Response Team. It's still in effect. I think they were in New Orleans recently.
Wow.
But it's a tough job. But unfortunately, we got really good at doing it. There's a lot of things that are predictable needs in the aftermath of a mass violence event. So it helps to, even if it's a local case where we went in as a force multiplier for the locals who didn't have the kinds of resources that we had. It was an opportunity to sort of help them train, and whether it was on death notification or on personal effects or how to brief victims on a case, on an investigation. It was a very, I think, useful resource to have and to be able to offer to small communities.
Post-holiday, sugar crash is real. And parents, let's be honest, finding snacks that satisfy your kids and don't leave them bouncing off the walls isn't exactly easy. That's why I use Thrive Market. They make it simple to find healthier, kid-approved swaps for all of those sugary, junk-filled favorites. And the best part, they've got a healthy swap scanner in the Thrive Market app. It's a total game changer. You scan a product that your kids love, like their favorite chips or crackers, and the app shows a cleaner, healthier alternative. So my kids love Takis. I got them late July Hawaiian habanero chips. Thrive Market also takes the guesswork out of finding safe, healthy food. All of their products are 100% non-GMO and free from over 1,000 harmful ingredients. Plus, their on-site filters make it easy to shop by your family's dietary needs. For example, I eat gluten-free. The best part? Everything gets delivered straight to your door, so you don't have to take that stress of searching grocery aisles or reading tiny ingredient lists. Ready for a junk-free start to 2025? Head to thrivemarket.com/Kate Casey and get 30% off your first order, plus a free $60 gift. That's THRIVE market.com/Kate Casey. Thrivemarket.com/Kate Casey.
Designed for working professionals, Georgetown's Executive MBA features a hybrid format that delivers community on campus and convenience at home. Classes are held in person 1 weekend per month on our Washington, D.C. campus and 1 Saturday per month online, helping you balance work, life, and career advancement. Plus, you'll have the opportunity to participate in an international consulting project abroad with a global client. You'll get to choose from a variety of electives to customize your curriculum based on your interests and career goals. And enjoy the access only Georgetown provides in D.C., with connections to industry experts, global leaders, and influential institutions. It's time to expand your understanding of how globalization shapes both global and local business strategy. Ready to build your legacy as a business leader? Earn Georgetown's Executive MBA. Explore the program at msb.georgetown.edu/EMBA-podcast.
I think a lot of people that are listening to this interview are wondering the same question I am, which is, in all this time, in this massively important job, intense job, how were you able to compartmentalize and have moments of joy and happiness that were separate from the job?
I think a big part of it was I had a support network. I mentioned Meg and Sharon, these colleagues and people who became very close friends, and we were each other's sounding boards and support. And we used to laugh, particularly in the years right after 9/11, because we were all involved in it. We would go out to dinner and have wine and mashed potatoes somewhere. We go to some nice in downtown DC, and we often had somebody who would come with us and drive, or we would take cabs and stuff. But we would talk, and we could sound out things that we couldn't talk to our staffs about, and some things that would come up. I remember a couple of years after 9/11, Director Mueller calling me and saying, we have the cockpit voice recorder for Flight 93. It's the only one that survived of the 4 flights. And it's going to be used in the Moussaoui trial. And he said, I do not want the families of those victims to hear that recording for the first time in court. And should we play it for them? So he said, figure it out and let me know what you think. So I thought about it. He said, you ought to hear it too. He said, so hear it and then let me know what you think. So he arranged for me to hear the cockpit voice recorder. And I spent a couple of sleepless nights kind of trying to figure out what to do with it. I called my friend Meg at the Pentagon, and I said, what do you think about this? I also talked to Sharon, who was at the NTSB, and she gave me sort of the history of, plane crashes and, not playing the cockpit voice recorder. The airlines never wanted it done because it was the last moments of a pilot's life in particular. But this was a little bit different situation. But I remember Meg telling me, you know what? She said, it's not your miracle. It's their miracle. They have this cockpit voice recorder. So, why not play it for them? Do it in a way that's sensitive. So I went back to Mueller. We wrote up a plan, and he agreed to do it. So we contacted all the families of the Flight 93 victims and invited them to a location in New Jersey. It was safe and secure. We had it. There were FBI security everywhere, and they were able to listen to the CVR wearing infrared headphones and being able to watch it on the transcript on the screen. And it was a very, very tough day. But for those families, the ones who did listen to it, and there were many, they said they realized that it was the most they could ever know in this life about the last moments of their loved ones. So they did have, it did provide some information to them that was helpful.
And also what a marvelous story of a group of strangers that rallied together and probably ended up saving a government building, if not thousands of people.
Absolutely. And, the courage, it's unimaginable to think what those people knew. They knew.
Yeah.
They were the last flight. So they knew what had happened in New York and at the Pentagon, and they knew what their fate was going to be. It was pretty clear to them. So to be clear-headed enough to say, some of them to say goodbye, make phone calls to their loved ones, to comfort each other. There was one young woman that was on that flight. I met her stepmother who had helped raise her, and she had called her stepmom from the plane, still when they had the airphones. So there was a woman sitting next to her she didn't know, who made a phone call to her sister and then handed the phone to this young woman and said, call your family. So her dad had gone to work. So she talked to her stepmom, and her stepmom told me she stayed on the phone with her stepdaughter until the end. And she kept telling her, I'm holding you. My arms are around you. I'm holding you. And the plane, that was when it went down. So, to see that, just to think about what those people knew, and the ones that basically stormed the cockpit, and it's not known whether they actually got in or not. But what you do know from the CVR, which is since was played at the 9/11 Commission and other things, is that they did the attack on the cockpit did end up resulting in the hijackers taking the plane down into the ground.
Yeah.
They never, like I said, they never got to Washington. So, and it's over the years to see so many of those families, struggle, but also some of them remarry, have more children.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still something you carry with you the rest of your life. The burden of grief is heavy, but it gets lighter as you carry it over the years. So, but it's still there. And that's what I've seen with those families, Pan Am 103 families and others. Life is forever changed. It will never go back to the way it was. For some people, their values change, their relationships change, what they, judge to be the most important thing in their life changes. I've seen people go back to school and take on new careers. I've seen them work with homeless populations, with abused kids, people making choices to spend more time with family. But it also, for some people, losing a loved one to a violent death or being a victim of a violent crime doesn't always make us the best version of ourselves.
Yeah.
So what people were before, they kind of sometimes carry that with them. And I've known family members who were angry and bitter till their dying day. And they realized it. I remember one father of a Pan Am 103 victim telling me that he said, when you are a husband and you lose your wife, you become a widower. If you're a wife and you lose your husband, you are a widow. If you are a child and lose your parents, you're an orphan. He said, but if you lose your child, what's the name for that? There is no name.
Yeah.
That's, I saw with particularly people who lose a child that's when it's always hard, any loss, but the loss of a child and their future and all that means is really tough.
For sure. Do you feel, you've met so many people and you're meeting many of them at a moment that they're at this nexus point, like their life totally pivots.
Mm-hmm.
What is something that you know to be true, having access to all of those people's pivotal moment in their life?
I think that people do their best. You can never completely prepare for something like that. And people respond the best way they know how. And people are always going to be very different in how they approach it and how they live their lives afterwards. Things will never be the same, but life can be good. You can still laugh. You can have joy in your life. You can change your life to focus on making life better for other people. But I will tell you, it's also for families, for parents who lose a child. There have been studies, the first one initiated by the Department of Defense, that say that if you lose a child to a violent death, that it's not uncommon for it to reduce the lifespan of a parent by 8 to 10 years. So grief is very real, and it does affect people's health as well as their mental health. For me, I think, we all, nobody gets through this life without something happening to them, without suffering in some way. What I've seen is pretty extreme. But as I said, I've also seen all the good that can go along with it, and how victims and families of victims manage to regroup and rebuild and go on with life the best way they know how. And then I've seen people do extraordinary things to help them, to support, like I said, the people of Lockerbie. And for me, and a lot of the people like me who work with these populations or worked with them, the way I survived it, the way I managed it, was just to focus on the fact that I can do something. I'm in a position, by virtue of where I am in the FBI or the Justice Department, I can do something to actually help, to provide some meaningful, practical help to people. And also, I always tended to focus on just those positives, that wealth of human kindness that comes in the wake of one of these events.
Yeah.
And just people's ability, the grace that so many families have particularly working with Pan Am 103 families and families of other things, where they just are so, for all they've been through, they still reach out to other people. When my dad died, I didn't tell any of the families, the victims I was working with, but the word got around and I got so many cards and letters from family members,
Yeah.
saying, so sorry about your dad. And, so like I said, in the midst of all the heartache that they deal with, they still have room and the grace to reach out and provide kindness and support to somebody else. So,
well, Kathryn, I mean, they talk about when people pass on and all of these people that have been meaningful to them gather around them like in the light. I'm telling you, you have thousands of people.
oh gosh, I don't, I just feel so lucky. It is a strange thing to care so much about so many people that I would never be able to, I have never met. I know their families or I know about them because I've worked the case and I've worked with their families. And it's a unique and sort of strange thing.
Well, because you're mourning the life of someone you never knew or will ever get to meet.
Yeah. And it's interesting because there's some people, families and others that I can honestly say that I've grown to love. And and there's all those for years and years and years, myself and other people, former and current FBI agents and Justice Department people and State Department people, others in Washington would gather every December 21st at the Pan Am 103 Memorial Cairn at Arlington Cemetery. And it was so interesting to go over the years and see people retire and still come back who worked on the case, people who would fly in from other cities to be there with the families. And over the years to watch the little kids, of some of these families, run around among the tombstones at Arlington and to watch them grow up and start taking leadership positions in the family organization and advocate. So I just feel really lucky, very privileged to have been able to work with them and for anything we were able to do as the government to provide support, meaningful support to them, to help them get through some terrible things and to sometimes make up for things that didn't happen early on. I mean, when Pan Am 103 happened, the U.S. government didn't have anything. There wasn't anything in place for them.
Yeah.
States didn't really cover their citizens who were victims of crime overseas. There was really nothing much in place. So when the two Libyans were handed over for a Scottish trial in 1999 in the Netherlands, that was our second chance, as the U.S. government to get it right and to do the right things for them. So it was pretty unusual. I still, looking back at it, I can't believe the chutzpah I had to go to the Lord Advocate of Scotland in the High Court and basically say, we want you to have cameras in the courtroom and provide a closed circuit feed to 4 different cities around the world so families of the victims can watch. Yeah. People told me they'll never agree to it, but they did because we agreed to make the courtrooms, the viewing sites, extensions of the Scottish court. Mm. We worked with them. So, there are a lot of things that we were able to do that I think made up for the way those families were treated in the early days or the things that they didn't get that they needed.
Well, you retired in 2020.
I was ready to go by the time, 2020 came around. I was tired.
Thank you. I'm just sort of in awe of your just how humble you are. I mean, you really have been instrumental in helping so many families in the most horrific situations. You really are an American hero. And I know you're going to scoff at that because that's who you are, but you really are.
Well, thank you. There are a lot of people like me who work and toil in government and take a lot of abuse from people who don't understand for as flawed as our governments are, at least, from my 30 years in the federal government, I came across the most amazing people, dedicated, sacrifice. The oath that I took was the exact same oath that a military service person takes, that the president takes. It's the same oath to protect and preserve the Constitution and protect and serve the American people, basically. And there are people who really take that seriously and sacrifice a lot of their own personal lives to be able to do that. And it is a privilege to be able to do that. And I was fortunate to have some remarkable mentors and people who believed in me, from Eric Holder, Robert Mueller, Janet Reno, who was the most amazing victim advocate I've ever known. She was just a phenomenal person who lived what she believed and was constantly calling me and going, all right, Kathryn, what are we going to do about this case? What are we doing for the victims in this case? How are we going to do this? What do you need from me? And really, put her money where her mouth was. And she supported and encouraged and broke down some barriers to help victims' families and surviving victims. So, like I said, I had some great people who mentored and pushed me. And I also had some wonderful people working with me that I hired or other people hired. And none of the things that we did would have been possible without all of these other people that were part of the team.
Well, but conversely, that's what Dick says about you. So there are lots of people that would also say that you were made a huge difference in the work that they did and the lives of the people that they came in contact with because of these circumstances.
If I'm dead, I'm glad. I'm glad. Like I said, it was an honor to me. There were a lot of things in my personal life that had to kind of go to the side over the years, but I wouldn't trade it. I would not trade the experiences of working, even when it was 15, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week for some periods, and a lot of sudden travel and stuff. The people I worked with and the people I met and the families and the victims really were a remarkable opportunity to see sort of the best of humankind in spite of the worst that was done to them. So, like I said, I loved it. And I would encourage young people. There are a number of young folks that find their way to me on LinkedIn or whatever who want to know more about victim services and being involved in that. And, I love to encourage them. And we need good people in public service, even when they're being denigrated by a lot of other people. It's important because I used to hear, somebody told me that a government's your enemy until you need a friend.
Truly. Yeah.
Until you need aid or some kind. So, like I said, I believe in public service, however you do it, whether it's volunteer or in a position. So,
well, tell everybody about an organization that's really special to you called CASA.
So, Court Appointed Special Advocates is a national organization that I came across when I was running the Missing Children's Program. And they recruit and train volunteers from the community to serve as the voice of children in neglect and abuse proceedings in courts around the country. And it's a wonderful organization. They have different chapters. When I retired, like I said, I knew a lot about CASA and the agencies I worked with in the Justice Department. I helped fund a lot of CASA programs and visited some. And I was delighted when I retired to be able to become a CASA volunteer myself. But I've worked with a number of kids in different situations, and there are other people who work with them. They're the investigators, the child protective service workers. There might be a guardian ad litem attorney appointed. But the role of CASA is to make sure that to focus only on that child's well-being and to make sure that the court knows, what the child's voice is, what they want. And then to make sure that all the different services and things that are required by the court order, are really happening for that child. So I've met some wonderful kids, some wonderful families, some struggling really badly. But it's a very worthwhile organization to be able to make a difference in the life of a child.
Well, you are an extraordinary person, and I'm very grateful that I had the chance to talk to you. I really appreciate your time and the service that you've given.
Thank you, Kate.
I want to thank my fantastic guest, Kathryn Turman, and remind you to click subscribe and to leave a 5-star review. And then make sure that you check out bonus episodes by going to my Patreon at patreon.com/KKC. Also, my What to Watch list is at katecasey.substack.com. I will tell you what to watch in unscripted TV every week, but I also included on my Substack photos that Richard most generously shared with me of evidence from the Lockerbie case. So make sure you go over there and check that out. Also, make sure that you follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram at @KKCCA, TikTok it's KKC, Twitter, Threads, and Blue Sky at @KKC. Make sure you check back for an all-new episode on Monday.
Hello, ladies and gerbs, boys and girls. The Grinch is back again to ruin your Christmas season with Tis the Grinch Holiday Podcast. After last year, he's learned a thing or two about hosting, and he's ready to rant against Christmas cheer and roast his celebrity guests like chestnuts on an open fire. You can listen with the whole family as guest stars like John Hamm, Brittany Broski, and Danny DeVito try to persuade the mean old Grinch that there's a lot to love about the insufferable holiday season. But that's not all. Somebody stole all the children of Whoville's letters to Santa, and everybody thinks the Grinch is responsible. It's a real Whoville whodunit. Can Cindy Lou and Max help clear the Grinch's name? Grab your hot cocoa and cozy slippers to find out. Follow Tis the Grinch Holiday Podcast on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. Unlock weekly Christmas mystery bonus content and listen to every episode ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts.